What would it mean for you if you could double your sales revenue in the next 90 days? What would it mean for you if you could 10 times your business over the course of the next year? That's what we're talking about today when we have Brittany Young on the podcast as today's guest. And we're talking about people who are tired of using the old man model of selling and who are looking for a new way, a better way to establish trust and create a connection with your prospective buyer. Hey, my name's Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast, and I'm excited to share with you an incredible process that actually works for getting you better deals, faster deals, and more importantly, better customers who love working with you. We're going to be talking with Brittany Young today on the show. You can always check out her content on her LinkedIn profile or on her website. And of course, before we dive into the conversation, we're going to hear a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. If you ever thought about sponsoring on the show, you can always reach out at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can support our podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. Thanks so much for supporting the show. We'll be right back soon. Life is constantly moving quickly, and in fact, I find myself more and more wanting a pause button to capture some of those special memories with my family. That's why I love what the team at Duncan & Stone is doing. They've created high-quality keepsake journals for every stage of life. From people who are freshly engaged all the way to welcoming their first child, Duncan & Stone has a series of journals that are incredible for capturing some of those precious memories, and not just memories, with the stories and conversations that you want to have with your loved ones one day. Personally, I love the Dear Daughter Journal because it captures all of the amazing memories that I want to be able to tell my daughter Maylee one day. The team at Duncan & Stone understands the value of keeping these memories close to home. That's why they've spared no expense in creating high-quality journals that are designed in-house because they know how precious these memories are. Check out duncanandstone.com and see some of the journals that will walk you through every stage of life. They're easy to use and beautiful to display, and most importantly, they capture what matters. Again, go to duncanandstone.com to find out more. Hey, Brittany, welcome to the show today. It's so nice to meet you.
Hi, Blake. I really appreciate being here. I'm excited to dive in with you.
So we connected for our listeners originally. I don't remember the exact details because it was kind of fuzzy. I had read something that you posted. I think you were posting like someone had like trashed you or something on social media, which it's amazing like how bold some people are on social media. But someone had said something like really ugly to you. I didn't know you, but you had popped up on my feed. And I was like, she seems like a decent, you don't seem like a serial killer. So I was like, hey, come on the podcast, But since then, I've had you on my feed a lot. I know you talk a lot about sales. I know there's some just really great content that you're putting on social media. The listeners have heard my intro. Why don't you go ahead and just take a minute and give your perspective on who you are, what you do, and what you're passionate about.
All right. Well, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate being here. My name is Brittany Young, and I am an executive coach for female leaders and their teams. And I help them upgrade their sales processes so they can 10x their revenue. And I do that with my unique method called the permission process.
I saw that in your headline. Let's just start there. Can we talk the recipe without giving it away? I mean, what is?
Oh, I don't mind giving it away. I think it's important to open up and allow people to see the real and raw. So yeah, the permission process got birthed from a conversation I was having with my coach, who said, you keep throwing this word permission around. What does it mean to you? And I said, it means to have freedom, autonomy, to be open, to be raw, to be honest. And it became a pillar in my business around, females and the leaders that I get to coach every single week, and being able to see them for who they are when they're selling. And she said, okay, well, let's create a method out of that. And so we put together this method. It was like 12 steps. And she said, maybe dial it back to 3 to 5. And I said, okay. Because a lot of the steps were redundant. And we were able to craft this and make it 3 steps. So the first step is self awareness. And I find that when you blend emotional intelligence with sales, um, you get a really nice, not only sales process, but a beautiful relationship with that
Mm,
prospect that you're speaking with. But a lot of us forget that you need to be aware of your own tonality, your own language,
mm,
how you're asking questions, how you're showing up in the sales process. Because if you're just sitting there with your arms crossed
mhm.
or you're typing and ignoring the person, it's not going to be a good look. So the first thing that I work on with my ladies is that awareness piece from an emotional perspective and also a strategic perspective. From the emotional perspective of how are you connecting with that prospect from start to finish, and then throughout the work that you begin together. And then from a business perspective, what are the questions that you're asking in your sales process that are emotionally moving and that get that person that you're speaking with to actually open up and be honest with you.
Mhm. It makes me
So
think
that's
of, sorry, go ahead.
no, that I was just going to say that's number one. It's the
It's the
first step.
joy of a Zoom call is talking over the other person. You know, it's funny hearing you talk about this because it's, and I love how you call it the permission method too, or the permission
Hmm.
method,
Yep.
permission process, excuse me. Two P's is way punchier than permission method, excuse me. But you know, when we talk about like having an authentic conversation with someone and being like aware, you know, essentially we're, you know, even thinking about how well you're connecting with someone. And it's interesting, like, it's almost like weird to have to tell someone to like just be a normal human being. But the
Yeah.
more that I've worked in sales and worked with people, it's funny how unintuitive that is. Like people
Hmm.
often think they have to have like this very robotic process to it. Or I was on a sales call the other day where this guy was selling me, and it was like I was doing like a government survey over the phone. It was like, so would you say this is somewhat important, mostly important, or not very important? And I was like,
Oh,
this is
geez.
the weirdest sales call I've ever been on. But more and more, I've realized how common people approach it from like a scientific way rather than having the permission to, you know, you can have a real conversation.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be scripted and it does not need to be, oh, hold on 1 second. Let me turn the page so I can ask you this next
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And the women that I'm working with, specifically those in the financial industry, they have that background instilled in them, have to sell a certain way. It's what I call the old man model.
Mm,
And so they've been taught by a bunch of old men in gray and blue suits on this is how you sell. And if you don't sell this way, we're going to reprimand you. We're
mm,
going to basically shun you in this industry. And
yeah.
there's a reason why 9 out of 10 financial advisors fail out of the industry because they're not taught how to sell genuinely.
Mm. So what's the next step after step one?
So the second step is it's a twofold. It's called realignment and also release. Realigning a sales process that actually works for you, and the release part, it really bounces back to step one. So I find that a lot of my clients become very emotional over how they used to sell versus how they're about to sell a different way. And it could bring up a lot of emotion from fear to um, abandonment, you name it, they experience it. And when that fear kicks in, we need to get to the bottom of why you're experiencing that fear in the first place.
Is this
I'm
is
not a
this
therapist, but
Well, is
Yeah,
this,
go
are
ahead.
you talking about like workplace trauma, or are you like a bad boss who was really harsh, or are you talking about like someone who has a hard time selling because they came from like a poor background, and so like even the ask is an emotional challenge to
Mhm.
overcome, or is it both, or like what does that look like?
So it's all encompassing. It's both. Came from a poor sales background or just haven't really been taught the skills and strategies. But also, a lot of them experience a lot of childhood trauma, and that starts to come up when they sell. So, for instance, I have a client right now who she was working for her dad at one point, and always in the back of her mind, she would hear, "You're not doing it right. You're not
Mm,
selling the right way." And so that was coming into her sales calls. And she'd get on and she'd get to the close and she'd hear that voice, "You're not doing it the right way."
mhm,
And she'd sabotage the sale.
mm,
And that's how you can really jack up your business is, these voices. So when we figured out, well, why are you having that? Where's that come from? And believe it or not, Blake, it came from hearing him coaching her on the sidelines when she was playing basketball as a little kid. She wasn't shooting the right way. She wasn't driving to the basket the right way. She was pivoting off the wrong foot. I
mhm,
played basketball, so I can speak to that as well. And when she figured that out, she started releasing all of these memories
mm.
that weren't serving her anymore. The next day, she signed, now these are big numbers because we're working in the financial space. She signed a $10 million client.
Yeah,
So,
that's a pretty big it's a
yeah,
pretty big number.
when you're able to release these old patterns and these old emotions that you've been holding on to, you start to sell your way. You start to sell in a way that feels more authentic because you're not focused on those old experiences. You're not coming into those sales calls playing in the back of your mind.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of my clients are in therapy to deal with their trauma. I just so happen to marry one, and we have these conversations around why do these emotions keep coming up? And it's just psychological. The fact that we are emotional beings, but
Mhm.
also sales and money are emotional.
Mm. Yeah.
So people buy with emotion, but
Yeah.
they justify with logic.
Yeah.
And you need to be prepared to not get emotionally involved with them, but also hold the space. And so to be able to do the same for my clients really plays a huge role in the way that they sell.
The social media, like I see a lot on social media, and I've experienced this myself even in like my younger days of selling, of not even so much that like people make it seem so simple, but it's like the post that someone makes that's like, if you're not doing this one thing in your sales pitch, you're doing it wrong. And like
Hmm.
almost like the guilt and shame of like, okay, well, I don't do it that way, or I don't navigate it that way. And so I even imagine not just with your customers, but for some of our listeners, getting away from the trauma of how we've been hardwired in the past, there's a little bit of like a messiness there of like finding your footing and finding what's you. And it feels like sometimes, I know for me, that with social media, I don't always give myself the space to embrace that messiness, and even like the failures that come with like, okay, wow, that was a really bad sales call. Like that, I
Hmm.
missed it completely. Um, what's been your experience as, because I know you're very active on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you're on the other platforms as well, but I know you're very active on LinkedIn. What's been your experience as you navigate sales and like kind of share your expertise, and um, people interact with you there?
Well, when I see those type of posts, I have to comment. And I usually say something in a form of a question. Why did you feel the need to post it this way?
Mm,
What are you trying to trigger? And when I see those type of posts, they trigger a lot of sales resistance. So if you're writing this way, whether you are trying to market your sales services or any type of service that you are delivering, if you're marketing in a way where you're saying, oh, you're missing out on this thing, that's very much a fear tactic in sales. And it works for maybe 5% of your audience. The other 95% really wants to learn what has been your main struggle and how have you overcome that? So, what's your story? Or if you're giving them some educational content and you're leaning in on, your expertise of what you do, can you stick to one point and one point only? I see a lot of posts where people will educate me on 15 different things and I get so lost.
I know.
And I always comment, "What are you trying to sell here?"
Yeah.
I'm very confused. Um,
I'm a chatty Cathy. That's me for sure. Is
yeah, there's nothing wrong with being chatty, but you need to have
yeah.
a really good strategy when you're on these platforms of, you know, getting curious. I think curiosity is something that's a lost art in selling. And that's the third piece of the process is can you bring curiosity into the way that you create your sales process, right? And I think a lot of us are missing curiosity in different ways in our lives. From, I have a 3-year old, so staying curious with her. If she wants to play with bugs outside in the lawn, I need to be okay with that. Or staying curious when I'm on a call with a potential prospect instead of getting distracted and not being present for them in the conversation. And I think social media can really lead us down a path that doesn't allow for curiosity, right? We're commenting, we're posting, but what's really the intention of behind what you're doing?
Mhm.
And I like to live in that space of constantly asking questions, questioning everything, staying curious, really using emotional intelligence to understand why somebody behaves the way that they do, especially on a platform like LinkedIn, because everybody is now there to sell something, whether it's a job or themselves or whatever they've got going on. If it's cookies, right? We're selling cookies. All is good. Can you bring curiosity into a way that you sell and sell authentically?
Yeah, and I think of that word curiosity makes me think of another word I really like, which is intentionality. I have a
Mhm.
4-year-old daughter, and I have to, and I also pair that. I love the word you used of being present, because there's definitely those moments where it's like the most mundane thing that stands out to her, like a worm, but
Right.
it's the world to her. It's the world to her. And so I have to be intentional in the moment to make sure
Mhm.
she doesn't see me on my phone. She doesn't see me distracted, but then I'm like, I'm right there with her. Um, and sometimes I do think sometimes in the sales process, we're taught, and I say we as in like general like social media trends, to be so rigorous on
Mhm.
if they say this, then you say that. If they object
Right.
here, here's the response. And, sometimes my daughter, for example, when she's looking at a ladybug, she just wants to know that I'm keyed in and locked
Mhm.
in and there's not a certain response. And it almost feels like some of those best sales conversations are when the potential customer says something or mentions something instead of like jumping on like, oh yeah, this is what you need to do, then kind of leaning in and creating that space. And I love the word you use, curiosity. It almost seems like it opens up a more authentic conversation.
It does. It leads to a deeper, more meaningful way of connecting to that person. And if you think about toddlers, that's all they want. They want that meaningful, deeper relationship with us because all day, every day, they're at school, somebody's playing with them, and it's undivided attention. And so when you're selling, that other person in front of you deserves your undivided attention. And instead of trying to match them with another question, how can you start to lean in with what they just gave you, right?
Hmm.
If they said to you, oh, well, yesterday, my car died and I was on the side of the road and I didn't know if I was going to be able to get to my son's baseball game. If you said, oh, well, how is that affecting your business? They're going to be like, is this person listening to me?
Hmm.
Right? To be able to steer the conversation with somewhat of authority,
Hmm.
but leaning into what they just said to you, no
Hmm.
matter how big or small the circumstance may be. But that presence is key. If you want to sell and you want to sell well and you want to be a great salesperson, you need to be present with that curiosity at all times.
And I don't want to reduce the brilliance of what you're saying, but I just keep thinking, I know I said it earlier, like we're talking about having like an actual conversation with someone.
Yeah.
And it's funny how unnatural that is for us sometimes.
Mhm.
Because we are so wired, and I'm sure you've been on a lot of great podcasts yourself, but I've been a guest on podcasts where, someone asks a question like, what was the first year in business like for you? And I talk about like pure misery, and we found out we were pregnant on day one, and I had just, quit my job and thought I was going to have all this business, and I didn't have any business, and I blew all my money like in the first month, yada, yada, yada. So you give like kind of like this really transparent response, but then the podcast host goes, wow. Okay, so question two. So what's your favorite thing about your work now? You're kind of like, that was such a weird, and I think that happens in sales sometimes where someone they lay out that data point, and we're so like, not even just scripted in terms of an actual
Rigid,
script, but we're
rigid.
so like here's the way you go through it, that and the shame is that, those could be, you said it earlier yourself, those could really be your best customers,
Mhm.
because they're like, wow, I really like this person. They're a real
Mhm.
human being, rather than someone just trying to make the sale.
Exactly. And I can't imagine what you were experiencing as far as emotions go, finding out, hey, we're having a kid and I quit my job.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
I was like,
that is wild.
cool, cool. Okay. It was literally day one. And I was like, okay. I was going to kind of like meander into this, but apparently I should really take this seriously. I think it was the next year we had COVID. So that was also fun.
Um,
But
I have
anywho,
a very similar story. I went for my ultrasound and my husband could not make it because he was busy letting his company know that he would no longer be working for them. And so when I got back home and I was so excited with the pictures, he was like, I quit my job today. And I just lost it. And yeah, I think that when people share these type of situations with you, if you're on to the next question, you're losing out on that authentic building a relationship. And those definitely are your best customers because they're sharing with you a part of them that maybe they're not sharing with others.
mhm,
And they're waiting and wanting somebody to listen
mhm.
and be present and be open. And if you're just moving on to, I got to get through this sales script, how is that serving them and how's that serving you? It's not.
Yeah. And it almost sometimes like clues you into someone who's not a good customer, not anything like about them, but they share something transparent about, let's say you're a consultant that helps with like management and leadership, and they're like, I don't think I even really want to ever hire someone. That's not even
Mhm.
something I ever want to do. I think some people take that and they're like, well, hang on, let me convince you like why you might want to. I'm much more akin to like, okay, you said you don't want to. Great. Like it's nice talking
Right.
to you. But if you don't always have like seek out, or here's a really great example. So I have a business called Podcastable, where we actually produce podcasts for people. So I get a lot of people who reach out who are thinking about a podcast. Well, I had a guy who called. He said, hey, I want to do a podcast. What's your fee? What's it look like? And we were just having a conversation about it. So I was like, so why do you want to do a podcast? Like, what are you thinking about? long story short, he was like, I don't even like podcasts. I don't even know where to listen to
Mhm.
a podcast. And I was like, well, like, do you like the idea of like getting on a microphone and like sharing content like on a semi-regular pace? And he was like once a quarter. And I was like, probably like once a week.
We
Yeah. And he was like, I hate that idea. And I was like, I'm gonna be real honest. It sounds like you don't even really like podcasts. And it came to find out he had a business partner who was like all in on him doing a podcast. But if we hadn't had an authentic conversation, if I'd just been like, great
Mhm.
podcast, it would have been a really bad customer. And
Yeah.
frankly, I would have, in retrospect, not served him well at all because
Mhm.
I was led by the dollar amount of the sale
Yeah.
rather than, um, actually keying into it.
And I think often if we're getting on sales calls with the mindset of I'm closing no matter what, that is going to block you from the sale.
Mhm.
And I find that a lot of folks that I work with, they automatically assume, oh, because this person's getting on a call with me, they want what I have. When in reality, the curiosity is both ways. They want to know more from you and build that relationship right then and there. But even so, before that, you should be building a relationship. That's a separate conversation. And you need to stay neutral. You need to stay curious because, again, like Blake just said, you don't know if that person actually needs what you're selling. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I often say to people when I'm on a call with them is, I might be able to help you. I don't know yet
Mhm.
until I learn more about you and your business, because that's true. I can't help everybody. I'm not meant to help everyone. And a great leader, business leader, they don't, they're not going to take on everyone. Everyone is not my niche.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that. And we need to get really clear on who it is that we want to work with and why. And when we're kind of going through those pre qualifications or however we decide to sell, um, there are keywords to not only listen for, but to look for, and somebody's body language and the way that they say something. That guy saying, I don't even know if I want to do this. Obviously, that's kind of a key indicator, but I'm sure his body language was not all in,
Yeah, he
right?
wasn't
He
like
wasn't
energetic. He
probably wasn't
was
leaning in or
yeah,
excited about what he was talking to
right.
you about. He was probably looking away or getting
Yeah,
distracted.
nonchalant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And you need to be cognizant of, are you bringing those to the table? Are you
mm,
showing up not present? Are you leaning away from the person you're speaking with
yeah,
or, distracted over here? Um, or something's going on in your background and it
right.
affects you. All of these things are really key to you becoming great at selling.
What are some of the or are there major differences um compared from a man selling versus a woman selling? You're supporting female leaders. How does like the gender role affect the sales process, or what kind of how does the conversation change in the work that you're doing?
Well, I think man to man is an easy sell, but not always. And I think ego can play a huge role when men are selling to men, depending on whether or not the guy that's selling actually worked on himself and, lessened his ego. But female to female, it feels more, and I can only speak because I am a woman. Um, it feels more of like a chat with a girlfriend, right? I'm going to get coffee with this woman who I really want to get to know. And it's like selling on the golf course for a guy. You go out, you shoot 18 holes together, you're having some beers and cigars. That's the way we want to be able to sell,
Mm,
right? Women don't feel as if they can sell on a golf course. And if you're listening and you're picking up what I'm putting down, this is a metaphor. So when a man can sell really well on a golf course, it's because he's having a conversation and acting as if that person not only is his equal, but also his counterpart that needs what he's trying to sell them.
Hmm.
What women don't really understand from a sales perspective is that they get to have those same conversation. It's just not on a golf course. It might be, it might be a Zoom, might be an in-person office, it might be um, coffee chat like this, but the curiosity and the genuine way that a woman nurtures and has that empathetic way about her, that spirit about her, that's the key that I find is different between a guy selling to another man or even to another woman versus woman to woman, right? So I can bring my empathetic, emotional way into a call. If I were to sell to you, Blake, it would be a little bit different. I can shoot the ish with
Yeah.
you. Um, and I could talk sports and I have that way about me. But if I didn't, I would need to find some sort of common ground,
Yeah.
which is our kids.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
women do a really great way of being able to connect the dots
Yeah.
and not putting men down in any sort of way whatsoever, because they do a great job at doing that as well. But from a man selling to a woman, there is that emotional disconnect sometimes
Well, I mean,
because
I was good.
nature.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
It's
you. Go ahead.
nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's okay. I mean, my listeners, we don't talk about gender differences, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like, abort, where am I going with this? But there are differences in
Mhm.
how we approach selling. And I think it's okay to mention that and call that out. Do you get into conversations with women where you have to kind of reprogram a little bit? Like I think about a
Oh,
woman
yeah.
who's come from like maybe a male dominated company and like a very corporate company and who's been taught like this is how you do it, like
Mhm.
do you have to kind of sometimes reframe that?
Yes. And most of my clients are women in male dominated industries that have a very much type A personality. And I'm not type A. And so when I come in with more of a slower pace, um, more of that empathetic way of being, they're like caught off guard.
Mm,
And they look at me and they go, "This is very counterintuitive.
hmm.
I almost feel obligated to hire you." And I'm like, "I don't want you to feel obligated.
Yeah.
But if you are in a male dominated industry as a woman, my question back to you is, do you want to keep selling like a man? Or would you rather sell the way that feels most comfortable to you?"
Mhm.
Because for decades, women have been taught there's only one way to sell. And so when you learn how to sell with your natural way of being, your intuition, um, actually having that conversation with empathy back and forth with somebody, the sale just feels like having a conversation with, a girlfriend. It doesn't need to be rigid. And that is something that I often hear from prospects or clients is, wait a second, that's not how I would do it. I'm like, okay, great. How would you do it?
Mhm.
And I will butt heads with you, but in a loving way and give constructive feedback when I'm working with you because I think it's needed.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to dissuade you if you said, I'm doing it this way and this is the way I've always done it. You're not my client. I
Mhm.
don't want to work with somebody who doesn't want to make that change and isn't ready to look at sales from a different lens.
I just love that line. You're not my client. Cause that's also, we get a lot of listeners to the podcast who are newer to the business world or weren't formally trained in business. They found they had a side hustle that turned into like their main gig or what have you. And I think that's one of the biggest light bulb moments for my listeners is realizing doing good business is not being the business for everyone, but realizing, hey, that person is not my customer. So a very powerful line. Brittany, we've run out of time. It went fast. I told you it goes quick. People listening who are like, man, I'm really resonating with Brittany. What's the best way for them to connect with you and to continue to engage with your content?
Of course. So you can find me, best place is LinkedIn. My last name is Young, first name Brittany. And if you want to have a conversation, I do offer a free 15-minute discovery call. You go onto my page and go to the featured section. There is a spot where you can get on my calendar to book that call. Be more than happy to find out how you're selling right now and what you want it to look like for the future. Yeah.
I love that. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, for our listeners, if you're listening to the podcast and you enjoy what you're hearing, what the heck are you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. I'm also going to be putting Brittany's LinkedIn profile link on this episode description. So if you want to be thinking about how to double your close rate and increase your income in the next 90 days and to stop using the old man model of selling, you might want to connect with Brittany with that free 15-minute discovery call. Again, I will have the link in the episode description. Hey, if you're listening and you want to support the podcast, don't forget you can always advertise on the show. You can reach out Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com. Or you can be a member of our Patreon for as little as the price of a cup of coffee, which these days could be anything, but it's only $5. That's at patreon.com/goodadvice. We appreciate all of our supporters of the show and excited to continue to bring you good advice in the future. All that said, that's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.